The night air near the border was thick, humid, and restless, as if something unseen was watching from the darkness. Mark Kilroy wasn't supposed to die that night. He was just 21 years old, a medical student, smart, disciplined, the kind of young man who had his entire future mapped out with precision. 4 days in Mexico. That was all this trip was supposed to be. A break, a celebration, a short escape before returning to responsibility. But somewhere between the laughter, the alcohol, and the blurred lights of Matamoros, something shifted. Around 2 a.m., Mark and his friends finally decided to leave. They had been drinking for hours, their energy fading into exhaustion. The streets were quieter now, the earlier chaos replaced by scattered voices and distant music. They walked toward the bridge that led back to the United States, their steps uneven but lighthearted. Mark slowed down. "Go ahead," he told them, his voice slightly slurred. "I'll catch up." It was a simple moment. Forgettable. One of those small pauses no one thinks twice about. He stepped aside, moving toward the edge of the narrow road. That's when the truck appeared. It had been there longer than anyone realized. Parked, waiting, watching. 2 men sat inside. They had already chosen him. From a distance, they watched Mark separate from his group. They noticed the way he stumbled slightly, the way he looked around without really seeing. Drunk, alone, vulnerable, perfect. The engine started quietly. By the time Mark turned his head, it was already too late. The door opened. Hands grabbed him. Fast, precise, practiced. He tried to shout, but a hand covered his mouth. His body reacted before his mind could catch up. Panic surged through him, violent and immediate. He struggled. For a moment, he broke free. His feet hit the ground again as he tried to run, adrenaline slicing through the alcohol in his system. But he didn't see the second truck behind him. It stopped right in his path. More men, more hands. This time, there was no escape. They shoved him inside. The doors slammed shut. And just like that, Mark Kilroy vanished. His friends waited. At first, they laughed, assuming he was taking longer than expected. Minutes passed, then more minutes. The laughter faded into confusion. Where is he? They retraced their steps, calling his name into the night. Nothing. The streets swallowed their voices. Panic began to grow, slow at first, then sharp and suffocating. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. By morning, the police were involved. By the next day, his parents knew. And within 48 hours, what started as a missing person case would spiral into one of the most horrifying discoveries in modern criminal history. But at that moment, no one knew what Mark had been taken into. No one could imagine it. Miles away, far from the city lights, surrounded by isolation and silence, a ranch sat hidden from the world. Santa Elena. It looked ordinary from the outside. Dry land, dust, nothing remarkable. But inside, something else existed. Something dark, something ancient. The truck carrying Mark finally stopped. The doors opened. He was dragged out, his body weak from fear and confusion. The air felt different here, heavy, suffocating. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but full, as if it's hiding something. They let him inside. A hammock. That's where they told him to sit. "It's okay," one of them said calmly. "Nothing is going to happen to you." The words felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. Mark's instinct screamed at him, but he had no power here. No control. Hours passed. Time stretched in unnatural ways. They gave him food, water. They spoke to him like he was a guest, not a prisoner. It made it worse, because deep down he knew something terrible was coming. Meanwhile, far beyond that ranch, another story had already been unfolding for years. A story that would explain everything. Adolfo Constanzo was not an ordinary man. From the outside, he was charismatic, attractive, intelligent, the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately command attention. People trusted him, believed him, followed him. But beneath that surface, there was something else, something that had been growing since childhood. Born in Miami in 1962 to Cuban immigrants, Adolfo's life was shaped by forces most people would never understand. His mother was deeply involved in spiritual practices, rituals rooted in Santeria and Palo Mayom. To outsiders, it might have seemed exotic, mysterious. To Adolfo, it became power. He learned early that belief could control people, that fear could shape reality, that rituals, if performed correctly, could influence outcomes. At least, that's what he believed. And belief, when taken far enough, becomes dangerous. By his teenage years, Adolfo was already different. Detached, obsessed, drawn deeper into the occult practices his mother introduced him to. But he didn't just follow them. He evolved them, twisted them, pushed them further than they were ever meant to go. When he moved to Mexico in the early 1980s, everything changed. There he found opportunity. Wealthy clients, criminal organizations, people desperate for protection, success, power. And Adolfo offered exactly that, for a price. At first, his rituals were simple: animal sacrifices, spiritual cleansings, charms for protection. His reputation grew quickly. People talked. Powerful people, politicians, drug traffickers, police officers. They all came to him, and Adolfo delivered results. Or at least, he convinced them he did. Money poured in. Luxury followed. His lifestyle became extravagant. Art, gold, expensive homes. But none of it was enough. Because Adolfo didn't just want wealth. He wanted control. Absolute control. And to achieve that, he believed he needed stronger rituals. More powerful sacrifices. Human sacrifices. At first, it was rare. It became necessary. Then it became routine. Back at the ranch, Mark sat in silence. The hours dragged on. His thoughts spiraled. He replayed every decision that led him here, searching for meaning, for logic. There was none. The room he was eventually taken to smelled unbearable. Rot, decay. Flies filled the air, their constant buzzing creating a sound that felt almost alive. He struggled again, but his strength was fading. They tied his hands, his feet. He begged. He didn't understand, but they did. Because to them, Mark wasn't a person anymore. He was a requirement, a piece of a ritual, a sacrifice. Somewhere else in the ranch, a large iron cauldron sat at the center of a room. The nana. Inside it, a mixture of things no human mind should have to process. Bones, blood, remains, objects tied to death and suffering. To Adolfo, this was the source of his power, the heart of everything, and it demanded to be fed. That night, it would be. The moment Mark realized he was not going to leave that place alive, something inside him shifted. Fear didn't disappear. It changed. It became sharper, louder, more desperate. His breathing turned uneven as the smell in the room wrapped itself around him like something physical. Rotting flesh, damp earth, and something metallic blood. The kind of smell that doesn't just reach your nose, but settles deep in your chest. He tried to move again. The ropes cut into his wrists. "Please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You don't have to do this." But no one answered him. Because to them, this wasn't cruelty. It was purpose. Not far from him, candles flickered along the walls, casting distorted shadows that moved like living things. Figures stood in silence, watching. Some of them looked young, too young. Their faces weren't filled with rage or hatred. They looked convinced. That was the terrifying part. They believed in what they were doing. At the center of it all stood Adolfo Constanzo. Calm, focused, completely in control. He didn't see Mark as a victim. He saw him as something valuable, necessary, a final piece in a ritual that promised something greater: protection, invincibility, power beyond human limits. And Adolfo believed in that promise more than anything. Years earlier, that belief had started small. Back in Mexico City, Adolfo built his reputation carefully. He knew how to speak to people, how to read them, how to give them exactly what they wanted to hear. You're going to be successful. No one will be able to harm you. The spirits are with you. Simple words, powerful effects. His clients didn't question him because his confidence never wavered. He surrounded himself with symbols, altars, candles, bones, creating an atmosphere that made doubt feel impossible. And then there was Sarah Aldretti. She wasn't like the others. She was educated, curious, studying anthropology at the University of Texas. She didn't grow up believing in this world. She chose it. That made her more dangerous. When she first met Adolfo, it felt like chance. A car accident, a brief conversation. But Adolfo didn't believe in coincidence. He saw something in her. Intelligence, influence, potential. He invited her into his world slowly. A coffee, a tarot reading, a conversation that stretched longer than it should have. By the time she left, something had already begun. At first, Sarah treated it like research, observation, an academic curiosity. But Adolfo knew how to pull people deeper. He gave her attention, importance, a sense of belonging. Then purpose. You're different, he told her. You understand things others don't. That was all it took. Over time, curiosity turned into fascination. Fascination turned into belief. And belief turned into loyalty. Soon, Sarah wasn't just observing rituals. She was participating in them, recruiting others, teaching them, helping Adolfo build something much bigger than a small circle of followers. Together, they created a system, a hierarchy, a cult. Young men and women, most in their early 20s, drawn in by promises of power and protection. Some came from criminal backgrounds. Others were simply lost, searching for meaning. Adolfo gave them that meaning. He told them they could become untouchable, that bullets wouldn't harm them, that they could walk through danger without fear. All they had to do was follow instructions. Exactly. No questions. And they did. Because once someone believes they're invincible, they stop seeing consequences. Back in Matamoros, the consequences were already piling up. Bodies had been discovered before Mark disappeared. Mutilated, dismembered, buried in shallow graves near the river. But no one connected the dots. Not yet. Because the truth was too extreme, too impossible, until Mark vanished. His disappearance changed everything. Unlike the others, Mark wasn't connected to crime. He wasn't involved in anything illegal. He was just a student visiting for a few days. That made his case different. That made people pay attention. His parents didn't wait. They pushed, demanded answers. And when local efforts weren't enough, federal agencies stepped in. The search expanded. Police checked hospitals, prisons, border crossings. Nothing. It was like Mark had disappeared into thin air. But the truth was far worse. Because while the investigation grew more intense, the ritual at Santa Elena Ranch was already underway. Mark's world had shrunk to a single room, a single moment. Pain came suddenly, violently. There was no warning, no preparation. 1 second, he was breathing. The next, everything changed. His scream didn't echo. It was swallowed by the walls, by the silence, by the people who believed this had to happen. Some turned their heads. Others watched closely. Adolfo didn't hesitate. To him, hesitation meant weakness, and weakness had no place in what he was building. The ritual wasn't just about death. It was about transformation. They believed that through suffering, through extreme, unbearable suffering, they could unlock something beyond human limits. That pain was a gateway. That death was an offering. And that what came after would make them stronger. Hours later, what remained of Mark was no longer recognizable as a person. Pieces of him were taken, used, consumed in ways that defy understanding. Because in Adolfo's world, power came at a cost. And that cost was human. Days passed. The investigation was still going nowhere. Until something unexpected happened. A mistake. One of Adolfo's followers, David Cerna, approached a military checkpoint. He didn't stop. That was his first mistake. The officers pursued him immediately, their vehicles cutting through empty roads until he had no choice but to pull over. When they searched his truck, they found illegal substances, weapons, enough to justify questioning him. At first, it seemed routine. Another criminal caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But then he started talking. What he said didn't make sense. Not at first. He spoke about rituals, sacrifices, a cult, names, details that sounded too specific to ignore. The officers exchanged glances. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just another arrest. When they asked him where he was going, his answer changed everything. Santa Elena Ranch. That name would soon become infamous. At first, the officers didn't believe him. But something about the way he spoke, calm, certain, made them uneasy. So they decided to check. What they found would expose the truth. And once that truth surfaced, there would be no turning back. Because buried beneath that ranch was a horror no one was prepared to face. The first thing they noticed when they arrived at Santa Elena Ranch was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that feels wrong. Heavy, like the land itself was hiding something. The officers stepped out of their vehicles slowly, scanning the area. Dry ground stretched in every direction. Nothing moved. No voices. No animals. Just wind brushing against broken structures and scattered debris. It looked abandoned, but it wasn't, because what had happened there had already soaked into the earth. David Cerna stood nearby, his hands restrained, watching as the officers prepared to search the property. His face showed no panic, no urgency, only acceptance, as if he already knew what they were about to find. One of the officers approached a small structure near the center of the ranch. The door was closed, locked. He hesitated for a moment before forcing it open. The smell hit them instantly. It was overwhelming, rotten, sweet, unbearable. Several officers instinctively stepped back, covering their noses. Others pushed forward, driven by something stronger than instinct, the need to know. Inside, the room was dimly lit, filled with objects that made no sense at first glance. Candles, Animal remains. Strange symbols. An altar built from items that looked both ritualistic and improvised. And then, at the center of the room, the cauldron, the nana. It sat there like something alive. Large, dark, filled with a thick, decaying mixture that moved slightly as flies swarmed above it. One officer leaned closer, trying to understand what he was looking at. Then he froze, because he realized those weren't just animal remains. There were human bones inside. Fragments, pieces, evidence of something far beyond anything they had imagined. The room fell into silence again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was filled with horror. The search expanded immediately. What started as suspicion quickly turned into confirmation. Officers spread across the ranch, digging in areas pointed out by the suspects. The ground was disturbed in multiple places, shallow, uneven, graves. The first body was found within minutes, then another, and another. By the time they stopped counting, they had uncovered 11 victims buried across 9 graves. Some were barely intact. Others were missing limbs, organs, heads. It was methodical, deliberate. Each body told the same story. This wasn't random violence. This was ritual. When they finally uncovered Mark Kilroy, everything changed. Even the most experienced officers had to look away. His body had been mutilated beyond recognition. Parts of him were missing, taken, used, consumed as part of something no one in that moment could fully process. The identification had to be confirmed through dental records. That was the only way. Word spread quickly. The case exploded across borders. What had started as a missing student had turned into an international investigation involving multiple agencies. And at the center of it all, 2 names: Adolfo Constanzo, Sarah Aldrete, but they were already gone. They had fled before the raid. Back in Mexico City, hidden within the chaos of one of the largest cities in the world, Adolfo believed he was still in control. For years, he had built a network of protection, connections with powerful people, influence that allowed him to stay one step ahead. And for a while, it worked. He moved between safe locations, gathering the remaining members of his group, holding onto the belief that he could escape, that he could survive this, because in his mind, he was untouchable. He had convinced himself of that, completely. Meanwhile, the authorities closed in. Slowly, carefully, piece by piece, they tracked movements, contacts, patterns, until finally, a lead. Someone matching the description of one of Constanzo's followers had been spotted repeatedly exchanging money in a neighborhood in Mexico City. It was enough. Surveillance began immediately. Days passed, tension built, and then a break. Sarah Aldrete saw them first. From inside the apartment, she noticed something unusual. Too many people outside. Too many faces that didn't belong. Police. Watching. Waiting. For the first time, fear replaced control. She knew what this meant. She knew there was no escape. Desperate, she wrote a note. A message claiming she was being held hostage. That she was a victim. That she needed help. She threw it out of the window, hoping someone would find it. Hoping it would change the narrative. But it was too late. The police already knew who she was. And inside the apartment, Adolfo was watching too. When he saw the officers surrounding the building, something inside him broke. Not fear, not regret, but the realization that his illusion of invincibility was collapsing. He had promised his followers that they couldn't be harmed, that bullets couldn't touch them, that they were protected. Now, those promises were about to be tested. The standoff began. Officers positioned themselves around the building, weapons ready. Orders were clear. No one leaves. Inside, tension reached a breaking point. One of the followers grabbed an AK-47 and opened fire through the window. The sound shattered the air. Chaos erupted instantly. Gunfire echoed through the streets as officers returned fire, taking cover behind vehicles and walls. Glass shattered, walls splintered, civilians fled. Inside the apartment, everything was falling apart. Adolfo moved quickly, pacing, thinking, trying to find a way out where none existed. Money was thrown out of the window in a desperate attempt to distract the police. It didn't work. Nothing worked. For the first time in years, he had no control. The gunfire intensified, and then silence. Inside a small room, hidden from view, Adolfo made his final decision. If he couldn't escape, if he couldn't win, then he wouldn't be captured. He turned to one of his most loyal followers, Martin Quintana. Do it. There was no hesitation, no argument, just obedience. The gunshot echoed once, then again, and just like that, Adolfo Constanzo was dead. The man who believed he was untouchable ended his own story. When the police finally entered the apartment, they found chaos. Broken glass, blood, bodies, and the end of something that had caused unimaginable suffering. Sarah Aldrete was still alive. She surrendered, calm, controlled, already preparing her version of the story. She claimed she was a victim, that she had been manipulated, forced, that she had no choice. But the evidence told a different story. Witnesses placed her at the center of the rituals. Participants described her involvement, her leadership, her influence. This wasn't someone on the outside. She was part of it, deeply. The trial that followed drew massive attention. The details were too disturbing to fully reveal. Some evidence was hidden from the public. Even authorities struggled to process everything they had uncovered. In the end, Sarah was sentenced to decades in prison. Her life reduced to a cell. Her story forever tied to one of the most disturbing criminal cases in modern history. Years passed, but the story never truly disappeared, because cases like this don't fade. They stay, in memory, in fear, in the questions they leave behind. How does someone go that far? How do people believe so deeply in something so dark that they abandon everything else? And the most unsettling question of all, could something like this happen again? Because the truth is, evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes, it looks like someone you would trust, someone charismatic, convincing, someone who promises power, protection, a better life. And by the time you realize the truth, it's already too late. Subscribe for more.